I suppose every marriage has its secrets. Some are small, harmless things you laugh about years later. Others, well, they're the kind that creep in slowly, like rot beneath fresh paint, hidden until it's too late. This is the story of my wife, Hillary. I thought we had a good life, a stable one at least. We'd been together for years, lived in a semi-detached house that had been in my family for generations. Nothing glamorous, but comfortable. It had memories, and I thought it held meaning for both of us. I work from home as a freelance designer. I like the routine. It keeps me focused, gives me purpose. Hillary, on the other hand, works at a local place called Winchester Logistics, a warehouse job that she took on a few years back. It was simple work, but she seemed to enjoy the camaraderie, the little bits of gossip and laughter that her co-workers brought into her days. She'd tell me stories about them at dinner sometimes, who had a new boyfriend who complained about the manager. Small-town stories, nothing dramatic. Then, one evening, she told me she was going out with some of the women from work. They decided to have a girls' night, just to relax after a long week. I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? I trusted her. So I told her to have a great time, and I settled back into my routine. She came home late that night, laughing and a little tipsy, full of stories about her friends' antics. It was nice seeing her so relaxed, happy, and I figured a night out was just what she needed. But that night out didn't stay a one-time thing. In fact, it became a habit. Fridays turned into Saturdays, and eventually, she'd go out on a Wednesday here and there. And each time, she'd come home a little later, a little more excited. At first, I didn't mind. She seemed happy, and I didn't want to be the kind of husband who made her feel tied down. Let her have her fun, I thought. But then I started noticing changes. It was subtle at first. She'd spend a little longer getting ready, wearing clothes I hadn't seen in years. Dresses that showed more, heels that made her a bit taller. And then there was the perfume. It wasn't the light scent she used to wear. This one was strong, musky, almost too much. I remember asking her about it once, and she just laughed, saying it was a gift from one of the girls at work. "They're always daring me to try new things," she said with a grin, brushing it off like it was nothing. Maybe I was naive, but I let it go. I figured everyone needs a little change now and then. Besides, she looked happy, and I liked seeing her that way. But as the weeks went by, it became harder to ignore. She'd leave for these nights out looking different. She'd wear lipstick, dark-eye makeup, things she never wore when we'd go out. And her stories about the nights started sounding a little too rehearsed, like she'd thought them up on the drive home. The real shift happened when she started going to this place called the Tall Gate Hotel. She'd mention it offhand, saying it was just a convenient place to meet after work. "It's close by, and they have these cozy booths," she said one night. But I knew the place. It was a dimly lit hotel bar, a place known for keeping things discreet, if you know what I mean. But still, I didn't want to come off as insecure, so I bit my tongue and let her go, convincing myself I was just being paranoid. Then came the night she met him. I don't know exactly when it started, but I know it was at the Tall Gate. I remember the first time she mentioned his name, Arthur. He was a sales director at another company nearby. She made him sound like just another one of those random people you meet out in the world, nothing special. But over the next few weeks, his name started coming up more often, slipped casually into conversations. "Arthur said the funniest thing tonight," she'd say, laughing. Or, "Arthur had the most ridiculous story." Every mention of his name grated on me, but again, I kept quiet. I told myself I was overreacting, reading too much into things. But deep down, I felt something shift. I started noticing how she'd light up when she talked about her nights out, how she'd glance at her phone a little too often, smiling at texts she didn't explain. She kept her phone close, even around the house, putting it face down on the table whenever I walked by. She was hiding something. I could feel it, but I didn't want to believe it. Then one night, she came home well after midnight. I was waiting for her, and when she walked in, I noticed she was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize. It was too big, definitely a man's jacket. I asked her about it, trying to keep my tone casual. She laughed it off, saying one of her friends had lent it to her after she spilled a drink. But there was a look in her eyes, a flash of something that didn't sit right. Her story sounded flimsy, too rehearsed. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I let it go, telling myself I'd just keep watching, keep listening. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there was probably a simple explanation for everything. But that jacket, that scent of another man clinging to her, it lingered in my mind like a splinter I couldn't pull out. As the weeks went on, the signs piled up. She'd come home smelling of cologne that wasn't mine. Her excuses grew flimsier, her laughter a little too forced. Every detail felt wrong, out of place, and I realized that the woman I'd married, the woman I thought I knew, was slipping away from me. She was living a life I wasn't a part of, a life she'd built on secrets and lies. And that's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her right away. No, I was going to wait, to watch, to gather proof. If she thought she could lie to my face and get away with it, she had another thing coming. Little did she know, the quiet man she thought she'd fooled was about to turn her world upside down. After that night with the jacket, something shifted in me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something obvious, something right in front of me. It gnawed at me. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail, every offhand comment, every late night, piecing it all together in my mind. I wasn't the type to snoop, but something told me I needed to be vigilant. I didn't go looking for trouble right away. Instead, I watched. I became more observant, taking note of every little change. Hillary had grown bold. That much was clear. She'd come home at all hours, each time with a new story, each one more hollow than the last. Her laugh was different, lighter, as if she was living in another world, one where I didn't exist. One night, she came home unusually late, and her excuse made less sense than usual. The girls wanted to stay for one more round, she said, avoiding my eyes. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but a nagging thought wouldn't let me rest. If she was lying to me so easily, what else was she hiding? I finally decided to check her car. It was a quiet evening. She'd already gone to bed, claiming exhaustion after her latest night out. I slipped outside, grabbed the spare key from my keyring, and opened the passenger door. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing, every nerve telling me I was about to find something I wouldn't want to see. And I did. Tucked away in the glove compartment, hidden beneath an old map, was a small bag. I pulled it out, my stomach twisting as I opened it. Inside was a set of lingerie, far more revealing than anything she'd ever worn for me. There was a bottle of baby oil and a small tube of lipstick, a shade I'd never seen her wear. I sat there, staring at the contents of that bag, feeling a cold wave of realization settle over me. I wanted to believe it was nothing, but the truth was staring me in the face. The woman I thought I knew had become someone else entirely. I put the bag back, careful not to leave a trace, and closed the glove compartment. I walked back to the house, each step heavier than the last. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, my mind racing, every detail clicking into place. She wasn't just going out with the girls. She wasn't just having fun. She was living a life I knew nothing about, with secrets she'd hidden in plain sight. But still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. If she thought she was fooling me, I'd let her believe it a little longer. I wanted to know everything, to piece together the full picture before I made my move. She'd underestimated me, thought I'd just sit back and take it. But she was wrong. I was done being the trusting husband. From that night on, I was going to find out exactly who she'd become. The next few weeks were a waiting game. I played along, kept my suspicions hidden, watching for any slip-ups, any new signs that would confirm what I already knew. And it wasn't long before more signs started to appear. She'd get texts at odd hours, her phone lighting up with messages she never explained. She'd laugh at something on the screen, then quickly put her phone down whenever I walked in. Sometimes, I'd catch her glancing at it, her eyes darting toward me, as if she was checking to see if I'd noticed. I pretended I hadn't. One evening, she came home with a new story. "We went to Tall Gate again," she said, sounding casual. "It's just easier, you know? The booths are private, and we don't get interrupted by strangers." Her explanation sounded forced, like she was trying too hard to make it seem normal. I nodded, playing along, but my mind was already racing. Tall Gate was becoming a habit for her, a place she visited more than anywhere else. And with each visit, she'd come home later, her excuses thinner, her stories more scripted. I knew I needed real proof, something undeniable. So I waited for her next night out, watching her as she got ready. She spent nearly an hour in front of the mirror, applying makeup, choosing a dress I hadn't seen in years. She sprayed that heavy perfume again, filling the room with a scent I'd grown to resent. I watched her leave, watched the way she smiled at me, the practiced innocence in her eyes. And then she was gone. I followed her that night. It wasn't hard to find her. I knew her route, knew where she'd be. I parked a few blocks away from Tall Gate, staying just out of sight, waiting. And sure enough, there she was, slipping into the dimly lit bar. I sat in my car, watching her through the window as she made her way to the back, where the booths were hidden from view. I didn't need to see more. The scene told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't there with the girls. She was there with him. I drove home that night, my mind made up. I was done waiting, done pretending. She'd chosen her path, and I'd watched her walk down it, step by step, until there was no turning back. I wasn't going to be the fool she thought I was, not anymore. The next morning, I began planning my exit. If she wanted to live a double life, she'd have to live it without me. But I wasn't going to make it easy for her. No, I wanted her to feel every consequence of her choices. I wasn't interested in a simple confrontation or a screaming match. I wanted her to see the damage she'd done, to understand exactly what she'd thrown away. I made a list of everything I'd need to handle, every detail that would ensure a clean break. Our finances, the house, the car, all of it would be sorted, leaving her with nothing but the mess she'd created. I contacted a lawyer, made an appointment, and started laying the groundwork. This wouldn't be a fight. It would be a surgical removal, cutting her out of my life piece by piece. In the days that followed, I kept up appearances. I acted as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't uncovered her lies. She seemed none the wiser, going about her routine, laughing and chatting as if we were still the happy couple she pretended we were. I watched her, every smile, every excuse, knowing it was all just an act. Little did she know, the act was about to end. And when it did, she'd be left with nothing but the pieces of the life she'd chosen over ours. I knew I couldn't let this slide. She thought she'd gotten away with it, that her lies would stay buried under a few excuses and late-night stories. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew I wanted a final reckoning. I wanted her to feel the weight of every choice she'd made. And as luck would have it, the perfect opportunity presented itself. The annual Halloween party her company hosted at the very same place, Tall Gate Hotel. When she first mentioned it, Hillary acted casual, like she was just giving me a heads up. "It's a work thing," she said, avoiding eye contact. "I'll be out late since it's at the hotel. We might even get a few rooms, so people don't have to drive home after." She laughed, glancing at me to see if I'd react. I didn't. I just nodded, pretending to buy her story, all while my mind spun with plans. Halloween was just over a week away, and I knew exactly how I wanted to handle it. If she wanted to play games in the dark corners of that hotel, I'd show her what it felt like to face the truth she'd been hiding from. I went up to the attic, digging through some old boxes until I found it, a black robe and hood from a Grim Reaper costume I'd worn years ago. It seemed almost fitting in a twisted way. A final, silent figure in the dark, waiting to bring her secrets out into the open. In the meantime, I kept up the act, watching her with that cold, detached resolve that had grown in me over the past few weeks. She didn't suspect a thing. She'd come home every night with the same smile, the same tired excuses, assuming I was still the clueless husband she'd managed to fool. But I could see the cracks forming, could see how much she'd changed, how little she cared about keeping up the lie anymore. As Halloween approached, I made the final arrangements. I told her I'd be working late that night, that I'd probably stay in, maybe catch up on some projects. She barely acknowledged it, too busy picking out her costume. A sexy witch outfit, she called it, one that seemed more suited for a night of flirtation than any work function. I didn't care what she wore. She was welcome to dress up however she pleased. I had my own costume, and it would be the last one she'd ever see me in. The day of the party, I kept my distance, watching her prepare. She spent an hour getting ready, fussing over her makeup, adjusting her dress. She looked at herself in the mirror with a confidence that felt almost insulting. It was like she believed she'd won, that she could live her new life without consequences, without looking back. I let her have her moment. Soon enough, it would be over. Once she left, I waited a full hour, making sure she was settled in at the hotel before I followed. I drove in silence, the Grim Reaper costume lying across the passenger seat, the hood folded neatly next to it. I practiced my approach a dozen times in my head, rehearsing every step, every detail. I wasn't interested in a confrontation full of shouting or accusations. No, I wanted something quieter, something she wouldn't forget. And I knew just how to make that happen. When I arrived at the hotel, I parked a few blocks away and slipped on the robe, pulling the hood low over my face. The thick, black fabric made me feel hidden, invisible, a faceless figure with a purpose. As I approached the entrance, I could hear the sounds of laughter and music spilling out from the party. I waited by the door, watching the guests come and go, blending in among the other masked and costumed faces. She wouldn't notice me, not yet. I slipped into the lobby, taking the side path toward the ballroom. It wasn't hard to find her. She was exactly where I knew she'd be, tucked into a dark corner booth with Arthur, the man she'd thought she could keep hidden. They were deep in conversation, laughing, their hands inching closer on the table. Her body language told me everything I needed to know. She was fully invested in this moment, wrapped up in the thrill she thought she'd never have to answer for. I watched them from a distance, letting the scene sink in. She looked like a stranger to me, a woman who'd sacrificed everything we'd built for a fleeting connection with a man who was just as shallow as she'd become. And in that moment, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was simply done. I approached their table slowly, letting the dark hood shield my face. Arthur was the first to notice me. He glanced up, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, followed by a look of discomfort. He clearly didn't recognize me, but something about my presence unsettled him. Hillary, though, hadn't seen me yet. She was too busy whispering to him, leaning in close, her hand resting on his arm. When she finally looked up, her smile faded. Her face paled as she realized who I was. "Patty," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at me, then at Arthur, her eyes widening with panic. She'd been caught, and she knew it. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, letting her take in the reality of the moment. Arthur shifted uncomfortably, looking around, clearly wanting to escape, but finding himself trapped. I leaned forward, just enough for them to hear me over the music. "You didn't think I'd notice?" I said quietly, my voice cold and steady. "You thought you'd get away with all of it?" Hillary tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like she was grasping for an excuse, but nothing came out. Her confidence crumbled in front of me, leaving her exposed, defenseless. "Every lie, every story you told me," I continued, keeping my voice low so only they could hear. "Did you think it wouldn't catch up with you?" Arthur tried to cut in, mumbling something about it not being what it looked like, but I silenced him with a single glance. He was as spineless as I'd expected, a man who'd never stand by her now that things had turned sour. I looked at him, my voice full of quiet contempt. "So, this is the guy? The one you were willing to throw it all away for?" Hillary reached out, trying to touch my arm, but I stepped back, making it clear I wanted nothing to do with her. "You don't get to play the victim," I told her, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "You made your choice. Now you get to live with it." Arthur muttered something under his breath, looking like he wanted to disappear. I turned to him, giving him one last look, one that made it clear he was part of this mess too. "Good luck," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "She's all yours now." I turned and walked away, leaving them both sitting there, stunned and speechless. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The truth was out, and she'd have to face it without me. I walked out of that hotel, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders, a calmness I hadn't felt in months. When I got home that night, I didn't wait for her to return. I already knew she wouldn't be coming back. I sat down, poured myself a drink, and finally let go of everything I'd been holding in. The anger, the betrayal, the lies, it all faded into nothing. She'd wanted excitement, a thrill, and she'd found it. But now, she was left with nothing. The day after the Halloween party, Hillary didn't come home. She didn't call, didn't leave a message. Nothing. I'd like to say I was surprised, but honestly, I wasn't. I knew she'd try to avoid facing me, maybe because deep down, she realized there was no excuse left to give. She crossed the line, and there was no coming back. When she finally did reach out, it was through a text, just a simple, "We need to talk." I left it unanswered. As far as I was concerned, we'd already said everything that needed saying. I wasn't interested in her explanations, her pleas for understanding, or whatever twisted version of the story she'd try to spin to make herself the victim. I had better things to do with my time, like arranging for her to be completely and thoroughly removed from my life. That week, I met with a lawyer. The goal was simple: make a clean break and ensure she left with the bare minimum. There was no point in drawing it out or getting into a back-and-forth argument. She'd broken every promise we'd made, every commitment we'd built over the years, and I wanted her out. Clean and simple. I wasn't about to let her turn this into a drama. I went through everything we owned: the house, the accounts, the car, the things we'd accumulated over the years. I made a list of what I was willing to keep and what I was willing to let go of, making sure she'd have as little as possible. The house, of course, was mine. It had been in my family for generations, and I wasn't about to let her get her hands on it. The lawyer assured me we could arrange it so that she'd have no claim to it, especially given her behavior. All I had to do was wait for her to sign. When I finally met her to discuss the divorce terms, she looked like a shadow of the woman she'd been. Her confidence was gone, replaced by a kind of desperation I'd never seen before. She was trying to play the part of the wronged wife, hoping to get a rise out of me, hoping I'd feel some kind of sympathy. But all I felt was a cold, detached resolve. She sat across from me, hands wringing nervously, trying to start a conversation. "Patty," she began, her voice shaky. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But can't we just talk about this? Can't we try to work things out?" I looked her in the eyes, my face expressionless. "No, Hillary. There's nothing left to talk about. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. These are the terms. Take them or leave them." Her face crumpled, but I didn't let it get to me. She started bringing up old memories, the years we'd spent together, the plans we'd once had for the future. "Remember how we talked about growing old together? This house was supposed to be our home. You can't just erase everything we had." I almost laughed at that. "You erased it, Hillary. The minute you decided I wasn't enough for you, you threw away everything we'd built. Don't try to make me feel guilty about it now." She looked down, defeated. For a moment, I thought she might argue, but she didn't. She signed the papers, her hand trembling, and slid them back across the table. I took them without another word, and that was it. Just like that, the life we'd shared was over. Once the divorce was finalized, I made sure she couldn't touch anything I'd worked for. The house, the accounts, everything that mattered to me was protected, out of her reach. I even ensured that her name was removed from any joint accounts, leaving her with only what she'd brought into the marriage. She wouldn't walk away with a single thing that was mine. The fallout from the divorce was quick and brutal. Word spread fast in a town like ours, and people soon learned the real reason behind our split. Hillary lost more than just a husband that day. She lost her reputation too. Friends who'd once welcomed her into their homes started keeping their distance, their smiles turning polite, their greetings growing colder. Even her family was ashamed, especially after I spoke to her parents and told them exactly why things had ended. They'd once treated me like a son, and the look of disappointment in their eyes when they realized what she'd done was almost heartbreaking. Hillary tried to cling to the friends she still had, the few people from work who'd known her before this mess started. But even they grew distant. People talk, and soon everyone knew the truth. The same women she'd once laughed with over drinks and secrets now avoided her, wanting nothing to do with her scandal. She was alone, left to pick up the pieces of the life she'd shattered. Arthur, the man she'd thrown everything away for, wasn't much help either. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd left her not long after the divorce became public. He'd found himself a new woman, one who wasn't burdened by the baggage of a broken marriage. Hillary had burned her bridges, and now even the man she'd betrayed me for was gone, moving on without a second thought. Over the next few months, I settled into my own life, free of her lies and deceit. I spent my days working, my nights in peace, enjoying the solitude I hadn't felt in years. The house felt different, quieter, but it was my space again, no longer tainted by her presence. I went through the rooms, removing every trace of her, purging every memory. By the time I was done, it felt like a new home, a place that was fully mine. Every now and then, I'd hear updates about Hillary. People said she'd become a recluse, barely leaving her house except for work. The carefree woman she'd been, the one who'd laughed at my trust and played her games in secret, was gone, replaced by someone who looked as tired and defeated as her life had become. She'd gotten what she wanted, her freedom, her excitement, but it had cost her everything. One day, our old neighbor, Mr. Barnes, stopped by to chat. He'd heard about the divorce, of course, and he was quick to offer his condolences. "It's a shame what happened," he said, shaking his head. "But maybe it's for the best. You deserve better, Patty." He also mentioned the state of the house, how he'd noticed some dry rot in the walls, the same issue he'd warned me about before. The house wasn't what it used to be, he said, and he'd heard rumors about the city buying up properties in our area for redevelopment. It sounded like a clean break, a way to sell the house and leave the past behind completely. I thanked him, feeling a sense of relief I hadn't expected. The idea of leaving the old place, of starting fresh somewhere new, suddenly seemed like the perfect next step. I put the house up for sale, contacting the city about their offer. The day I signed the papers, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Hillary's ghost was gone, the house was no longer tied to our shared memories, and I was finally free to move forward. Hillary, meanwhile, had no such escape. She'd become a whisper, a story people told with pity, the woman who'd traded everything for a fleeting thrill and ended up with nothing. I didn't need to check in on her or wonder how she was doing. Life had taken care of that for me. And so, as she faded into the background, I started looking toward my future, leaving her and all her lies firmly in the past. After the house was sold, I moved a few towns over and found a small, cozy place that suited me perfectly. No history, no memories, just a fresh start. It felt strange at first, waking up without the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me, but I quickly got used to it. I had my work, my routines, and best of all, I had my peace. Friends and neighbors came around to help me settle in, some bringing meals, others stopping by just to chat. It felt good, that sense of community and support. In my old life, I'd taken these simple things for granted, letting myself get buried under work and married life. Now, though, I had the time and space to appreciate the small things, to build something new on my own terms. Once I was settled, I decided it was time to start putting myself out there a bit more. I took up an art class on weekends, something I'd always been curious about, but never made time for. The class was held at a local studio, a small place where people of all ages came together to learn, to create, and to share stories. I quickly became part of the group, getting to know everyone by name, swapping stories and jokes as we worked on our projects. There was one woman in particular, Linda, who caught my attention. She was a retired teacher, warm and genuine, with a quick wit that kept everyone laughing. She'd come by my table now and then, offering advice on my drawings, and before I knew it, we'd become friends. It felt easy, comfortable. I wasn't looking for anything more than friendship, but I enjoyed her company, and we started meeting outside of class, grabbing coffee, or taking walks around town. In those early days, I wasn't ready to tell her about Hillary, about the betrayal I'd been through, but Linda didn't pry. She was kind enough to let me open up at my own pace, and bit by bit, I found myself sharing parts of my past. I kept the details vague, but she understood the weight of it, the toll it had taken on me. And in her quiet, steady way, she helped me find a way forward. Meanwhile, I'd occasionally hear bits and pieces about Hillary's life from old acquaintances. After the divorce, she'd lost nearly everything. Her reputation, her friends, even the support of her family. She was still working at Winchester Logistics, still living in the same town, but her life had changed drastically. She'd gone from being the life of the party, the woman everyone gravitated toward, to someone people felt sorry for. The thrill she'd chased had turned out to be nothing more than a fleeting illusion, and she was left with the ashes of what she'd burned. One day, I ran into our old neighbor, Mr. Barnes, at a local hardware store. He looked surprised to see me, but his smile was genuine as he shook my hand. "Well, Patty, good to see you're doing well," he said, his eyes crinkling with warmth. He didn't bring up Hillary right away, but I could tell he was curious, maybe wondering how things had really gone down. We chatted for a while, catching up on life, on the changes we'd both seen in the town, and eventually, he brought her up. "I hear she's not doing so well," he said, his tone soft, almost pitying. "People say she barely leaves her house anymore. I guess it's all catching up with her." I nodded, feeling a detached sort of satisfaction. I didn't wish her harm, but knowing she was facing the reality of her choices brought me a sense of closure. She'd spent years lying, sneaking around, thinking she could live a life free of consequence. Now, she was left with nothing but the aftermath. Life is a way of handing out justice in its own time. Over the next few months, I settled into my new life, feeling more at ease with each passing day. Linda and I continued spending time together, our friendship growing into something steady and reliable. One night, we found ourselves at a local diner, sharing a slice of pie and laughing over a story she'd told about her days as a teacher. I realized then how far I'd come. The pain and anger that had once consumed me had faded, replaced by a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I saw a future that wasn't colored by the shadows of my past. One evening, after class, Linda invited me to her home for dinner. It was a modest place, cozy and welcoming, filled with the kind of warmth that comes from years of love and care. As we sat at her kitchen table, sharing a meal and laughing over stories, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I realized that I didn't need to carry the bitterness anymore. I didn't need to dwell on the pain or the betrayal. I'd found something real, something solid, something that belonged to me alone. Meanwhile, I'd heard that Hillary's life had only continued to deteriorate. Friends from our old neighborhood mentioned that she'd contracted an illness, something she'd caught from one of her old flings. They said she was struggling, that her once vibrant social life had dwindled to nothing, leaving her isolated and alone. Her family barely spoke to her, and her coworkers kept their distance, unwilling to be associated with the mess she'd made of her life. I didn't feel sorry for her. I knew she'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. She'd wanted excitement, wanted a life that was different from the one we'd shared, and she'd gotten it. But the cost had been steep, and now, with no one left to turn to, she was left with the full weight of her actions. As for me, I moved forward step by step. I let go of the memories, the anger, the pain. Linda and I grew closer, slowly building something that felt true, something that wasn't tainted by lies or betrayal. She knew my past, knew the scars it had left, but she never let it define me. With her, I felt free to be myself, free to live without the shadows of my old life hanging over me. One evening, as we sat on her porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Linda turned to me, her eyes soft and understanding. "You're a good man, Patty," she said, her voice steady. "You deserve better. And now you have it." Her words sank in, and for the first time, I truly believed them. I had a life I could be proud of, a future that was mine to shape. Hillary was just a chapter, a part of my story, but she didn't define me. I'd found my way out of the wreckage she'd left behind, and I was stronger for it. And so, as I watched the sun set that night, I let go. I let go of the pain, the betrayal, the memories that had once haunted me. I was done with the past. I was free. In the months that followed, I felt myself becoming lighter, as if I'd shed an old skin I no longer needed. My life was my own again, and I could wake up every morning without that feeling of doubt, of distrust. I'd come to realize that trust was like the foundation of a house. Once it's cracked, the whole structure begins to crumble. With Hillary, that foundation had eroded, and it had taken the life we'd built together down with it. But now, I was rebuilding, and this time, I'd made sure the foundation was solid. Linda had become a part of that new life, though I hadn't rushed into anything serious. We kept things easy and natural, both of us understanding that life wasn't meant to be hurried. She'd been through her own hardships, had her own scars, but she faced them with a calm strength that I admired. Being with her was different. No lies, no secrets, Just a quiet honesty that I'd learned to value more than anything. I still heard occasional updates about Hillary, though I never asked for them. Our old neighbor, Mr. Barnes, had a knack for keeping tabs on everyone, and he'd sometimes mention things he'd heard about her. From what I gathered, her life hadn't improved. She was still working at Winchester Logistics, still keeping her head down and avoiding the friends who'd once been by her side. It seemed she'd become a fixture at her job, someone people pitied but didn't quite trust. It was a fitting outcome, in a way. The woman who'd once thrived on attention now found herself on the outside, looking in. Mr. Barnes mentioned once that he'd seen her with a distant look, as though she'd lost her sense of direction, her sense of purpose. She'd once been the woman who'd craved excitement, who'd sought adventure in all the wrong places. Now, it seemed, she'd found nothing but empty spaces and broken bridges. People no longer saw her as the confident, carefree woman she'd once been. Instead, they saw her as a reminder of what happens when you gamble away the things that truly matter. As for me, I felt like I'd come full circle. Moving forward was no longer just an idea, it was a reality. I'd grown used to the quiet satisfaction of living a life that was completely my own. I kept up my work, took on new clients, expanded my projects. For the first time in years, I felt inspired, as though the weight of the past had finally lifted. The projects I took on became more than just work. They were expressions of a life that had become stable, dependable, and free. One evening, while organizing some old files, I came across a few photos from our old life. There was one in particular that struck me, a picture of Hillary and me from years ago, back when things were simpler. I stared at it for a moment, feeling an odd mix of nostalgia and relief. We'd looked happy back then, but I knew now that even in those moments, something had been missing. I didn't feel the pain I'd once felt when I thought about her. Instead, there was a quiet sense of understanding. She'd been a part of my life, a part of my story, but nothing more. After a moment, I put the photos back, closing the drawer. I knew I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need reminders of the past, didn't need to hold on to old memories. My life was here, now, in the present, with new people, new experiences, and new memories waiting to be made. Linda and I continued spending time together, our friendship slowly deepening. She was there for me in a way I hadn't expected, bringing a sense of calm and stability that I'd almost forgotten was possible. We'd spend hours talking, sharing our hopes, our stories, our quiet moments of contentment. There was no rush, no need to label anything. We were just two people who'd found comfort in each other's company. One weekend, Linda invited me to a family gathering. It was a small thing, just a few relatives, a casual barbecue in her sister's backyard. I was hesitant at first. I hadn't been to a family event since before the divorce, and part of me worried about how I'd feel surrounded by people who knew nothing of my past. But Linda's family welcomed me with open arms, treating me like one of their own. There were no awkward questions, no prying, just laughter, easy conversation, and a sense of belonging that warmed me in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was in those moments, sitting around the picnic table with Linda and her family, that I realized just how far I'd come. I'd been through betrayal, through anger, through the wreckage of a marriage I'd once believed in. But now, here I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared, who saw me for who I was and not for what I'd been through. Linda's sister pulled me aside at one point, a kind smile on her face. "I can see you're good for her," she said, patting my shoulder. "She deserves someone steady, someone real. And from what I can tell, you're exactly that." Her words stuck with me long after the barbecue ended, echoing in my mind as Linda and I drove home. I realized then that she was right. I was steady, dependable, and real. I was someone who'd learned from the past, who'd come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more sure of myself. I didn't need to hold on to bitterness or anger. I'd found my own sense of peace, and that was worth more than any revenge or retribution. As the weeks turned into months, Linda and I continued to build a life together, one day at a time. It was slow, steady, and exactly what I needed. I never thought I'd find love again. Never thought I'd be able to open myself up to someone after everything I'd been through. But with Linda, it felt right. There were no secrets, no hidden agendas. Just honesty, trust, and the quiet understanding that we were both here for the long haul. Every now and then, I get a fleeting thought of Hillary, a passing memory of the life we'd once shared. But each time, it grew fainter, like a distant echo I could barely hear. I didn't need to keep track of her anymore, didn't need to wonder how she was doing. She was living her own life, dealing with her own choices, and I was finally free of it all. One evening, as Linda and I watched the sunset from her back porch, she turned to me, her eyes warm and filled with a quiet contentment. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked, her tone gentle, as if she already knew the answer. I shook my head, a small smile crossing my face. "Not much anymore," I said. "The past is gone. I'm focused on what's ahead." She nodded, slipping her hand into mine. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the last rays of sunlight fade into the horizon. I realized then that I'd truly moved on, that I was ready for whatever the future held. I didn't need to look back. I had everything I needed right here, in this moment, with a life that was honest, simple, and filled with peace. And as far as I was concerned, that was all the closure I'd ever need. In the end, it's strange how life works out. I'd spent years tied to someone I thought I knew, someone I believed shared my values, my loyalty. But Hillary's betrayal taught me something valuable. People reveal who they truly are in the moments they think no one's watching. And sometimes, the person you trusted most becomes a stranger. I found peace by letting life run its course. I didn't need to force any revenge or hold on to bitterness. In the end, Hillary faced the consequences of her choices all on her own, without me lifting a finger. She chased excitement and thrill, and life returned it to her with emptiness and regret. While she drifted further into isolation, I found a new beginning, a life built on truth, not illusion. Linda and I continued to grow closer, our days filled with simple joys. Each moment with her reminded me that trust isn't something to take lightly. It's the foundation of everything good in a relationship. And with Linda, I knew I'd found a partner who truly valued that trust. I look back now with a sense of calm, free of the shadows that once haunted me. I have no anger left, no desire to revisit the past. I've learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living a life filled with peace, leaving the people who hurt you to deal with their own mistakes. As I look toward the future, I realize it's the only thing that matters. Moving forward with honesty, building a life that's genuine. And as for the past, it's nothing more than a lesson, one that shaped me but no longer defines me.